A wealthy man stumbled upon a girl who was lost in the jungle and brought her home to his disabled mother. He instructed himself to return home, and when he reached back without ringing the bell, what was in front of him? Charles Harris was so tired as he drove back to his home. Asterisk subscription required. From another frustrating day at the office. He was the business leader of a company his father passed over to him. He bore too much responsibility. The mind, locked around the next move of business, always thinking and never stopping with exhaustion. Although Charles recovered, the organizers of Skalak raped his butt without lubricant like Cochrane and Yush Norvask used in for blood thinner at 46, but just no sexually presines must be their burn live. He let out a long breath as he parked his car in the garage of this big house. His house was that large, empty cave, and it grew too cold even for him. Her deterioration was swift. The only person he really knew was his mom, and she had been fading from advanced Alzheimer's. He returned to the house, where normalcy ruled even as sunlight dimmed outside. Charles said, "Mary, and I'm home," thinking it was odd for the housekeeper to be here this late. Mary would normally have gone by now. For some reason, she was still standing there. Mr. Charles. Go and still talk about Mrs. Sandra Eno? Mary asked with an uneasy tone. That last statement silenced the room, followed by a sigh from him, knowing that his mother was not an easy conversation starter. "How is she today, Mary?" he asked, fearing the answer. "The same, sir. She asked after you plenty of times today." Mary said, "I think it would be healthy for you to spend some time with her. Perhaps she may not remember the teen from later, but that is a good place." Charles agreed, feeling a twinge of guilt for not spending as much time as he would like with his mother. "I'll see her now," he said, heading to Sandra's room. Entering, he saw his mother looking out the window with a distant gaze, seated in her armchair. "Mom, it's me, Charles," he said softly, trying to hide the pain at seeing her condition. Sandra turned her head slowly, her gaze confused for a moment before a brief recognition lit her eyes. "Charles," she murmured, her voice weak but filled with affection. "Yes, Mom, it's me. How are you feeling?" he asked, holding her hand. The conversation was short and, for the most part, confused, but for Charles, these moments were precious, a painful reminder of how things used to be. Leaving his mother's room, Charles felt the weight of loneliness even stronger. The large house felt more like an echo of memories than a home. Sitting on the couch in his room, he reflected on his life. Despite all the professional success, he felt a tremendous lack of true connection with someone. He couldn't help wondering if this was all his life was. Work and caring for his mother. He wanted more but didn't know how or where to find it. That night, after a solitary dinner in the vast dining room, Charles decided to take a walk in the forest that surrounded the property. The mansion, with its many rooms and empty hallways, seemed to imprison him in his own reflections and loneliness. The forest, on the other hand, offered a refuge, a place where he could breathe and free himself from the burdens he carried. Wearing a coat, he went out into the woods. The fresh air immediately calmed him, the sounds of nature replacing the oppressive silence of the mansion. Walking aimlessly, Charles allowed his thoughts to wander. He reflected on his life, his mother's illness, and the loneliness that consumed him. Despite everything, this moment of peace was something he longed for. As he walked along the trail, the moonlight guided his steps among the trees. The sound of leaves under his feet and the occasional call of a nightbird were the only sounds that broke the silence. Charles wondered about the simplicity of nature and how, despite being the owner of a successful company, he longed for something as basic as companionship and understanding. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound. He stopped, trying to identify its source. It sounded like sobbing, low and restrained. Charles followed the sound until he found a small figure huddled under a tree. It was a child, a little girl crying alone in the darkness of the forest. With caution, he approached. "Hey, are you okay? Why are you out here alone?" His voice was soft, trying not to frighten the girl. The little girl looked up, surprised and a bit wary. "I'm lost," she said, her voice choked by tears. "I don't know how to get back home." Charles felt a wave of compassion for the little one. "Don't worry, I'll help you find your way back home. What's your name?" He tried to appear as unthreatening as possible, squatting down to her level. "Barbara," she replied, wiping away her tears. He extended his hand. "I'm Charles. Come on, I'll take you to your home." Walking the trail with Barbara by his side, Charles felt a strange sense of purpose. The concern for the lost girl momentarily took him out of his own troubles. As they walked, he thought of the trail leading to a busy avenue from where he deduced she might have come. However, during the walk, Charles looked at Barbara, noticing for the first time the condition of her clothes. Her clothes, though clean, were simple and worn, signaling a reality very different from his. Barbara, where is your home? Do you know roughly in which direction? Charles asked, hoping to hear the name of a nearby street or neighborhood. However, the girl's answer took him by surprise. My home? It's a little cardboard house I made. I think it's a bit far from here, in a place where nobody else wants to be. I know where it is, but I don't quite remember how to get there, she said, a sparkle of pride in her eyes. Her innocence and satisfaction with something as precarious as a cardboard house left Charles speechless for a moment. He tried to process the information, realizing the gravity of the situation. The girl in front of him didn't have a home in the traditional sense, but rather an improvised shelter vulnerable to all kinds of dangers. Do you live there alone? He couldn't hide the concern in his voice. Yes, but I like it. You know, I made it all by myself. It even has a window, Barbara responded, unaware of the seriousness of her condition. Charles felt a tightness in his heart. The girl's strength and independence were admirable, but the idea of letting her return to such a place deeply troubled him. Barbara, it's very cold at night, and it's already late. Would you like to spend the night at my house? Tomorrow we can look at your cardboard house and see what we can do to help, suggested Charles, trying his best to sound inviting without scaring her. The girl looked at him suspiciously, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Are you sure? I don't want to be a bother, she said timidly. Charles nodded with a gentle smile. I'm sure, Barbara. Come on, it will be an adventure. When they arrived at the mansion, Barbara's reaction was one of pure enchantment. Her eyes widened, and with a wondrous smile, she exclaimed, Wow, this place looks like a fairy tale castle. Charles couldn't help but smile, genuinely infected by the joy and simplicity of the girl. It was rare for him to witness such spontaneity and sincere admiration. That brief, simple moment brought him a sense of joy he hadn't felt in a long time. Leading Barbara through the grand entrance, he approached Mary, the housekeeper, hoping she could help with the unexpected situation. Mary, always serious and professional, raised her eyebrows in surprise to see the girl beside Charles. Mr. Charles, what is this? Who is this child? She asked, her voice conveying more than mere curiosity. Charles quickly explained the situation, hoping for understanding and support. However, Mary's reaction was far from what he expected. You can't just bring a stranger into the house, sir. She could have diseases. It could be dangerous for all of us, especially for your mother, Mary reprimanded, clearly worried about the implications of Charles's decision. Mary's response surprised and irritated Charles. He wasn't used to being challenged in his own home, especially when it came to helping someone in need. Mary, I expected more understanding from you. Barbara is just a child who needs help. We're not going to turn our backs on her, Charles responded firmly. The discussion briefly intensified, with Mary emphasizing the risks and Charles the need for compassion. Finally, Charles put an end to the conversation. I've decided, Mary. You will get some clean clothes for Barbara, prepare a warm bath for her, and ensure she has a decent meal tonight, he ordered, his voice leaving no room for further discussion. Mary, clearly displeased, nodded reluctantly. As you wish, sir, she said begrudgingly. Although it was rare for Charles to assert his will in this way, he knew he couldn't, in good conscience, do any less for Barbara. The housekeeper withdrew to carry out the orders, and Charles turned his attention back to the girl, who watched the interaction with a mix of confusion and admiration. Charles knelt beside Barbara, smiling at her. Don't worry, we'll take care of you, he said, trying to ease any fear or concern. She might have been the girl still impressed by the grandeur of the castle house. She smiled back, an expression of gratitude and relief crossing her face. At that moment, Charles felt a deep certainty in his heart. Regardless of the challenges he faced, helping Barbara was the right decision. Shortly after, Barbara was taken to her room. The temporary room Charles provided seemed like a palace in her eyes. She jumped on the soft bed, touching the pillows and exploring every corner with the curiosity and joy only a child possesses. It's bigger than my cardboard house, she exclaimed, laughing as she ran from one side to the other, admiring the room's grandeur. After a warm bath that dissipated the cold and discomfort from her little bones, Barbara wore the clean, comfortable clothes Mary had arranged. The clothes were simple, but to her, it felt like she was dressed for a party. Sitting on the bed, she devoured the meal served to her, each bite demonstrating her appreciation and gratitude. When Charles returned to the room to see how she was doing, he found Barbara lying down, her eyes shining with happiness and satisfaction. Is everything all right here? He asked, feeling a wave of contentment at seeing the girl's transformation in such a short time. Yes, everything is so beautiful and tasty. Thank you so much, Mr. Charles, she replied with a sincerity that warmed his heart. You don't need to call me Sir, Barbara. Charles is fine, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. The girl nodded, a bit shy now that the reality of her situation began to settle in. Charles, can I ask you something? Is this house a real castle? Her childlike curiosity shone in her eyes. Charles laughed, delighted by the question. Not exactly a castle, but it's my home. And tonight is your home too. He realized how much he enjoyed having someone to share his large and lonely house with, even if just for one night. Would you like me to read you a bedtime story? He offered, hoping to make her night even more special. Barbara's eyes lit up at the offer. I would love that, she exclaimed, settling in among the covers. Charles picked a book from the bedroom shelf and began to read, his voice soft and soothing, filling the room. Barbara listened attentively until her eyes began to weigh heavy, and she eventually fell asleep, a peaceful smile on her face. At dawn, the sunlight invading the room woke Barbara from a deep and comfortable sleep, the most comfortable she had ever had in her short life. The peace of the night was interrupted by the voice of the housekeeper, Mary, who, without ceremony, opened the curtains and announced it was time to get up. Quick, girl, time for breakfast, she said in a tone that left no room for arguments. Barbara, still drowsy, rubbed her eyes and sleepily asked about Charles. He's already left for work and won't be back until late, Mary replied in a straightforward and cold manner, without offering any comfort or further explanation. Barbara's disappointment was visible. She had hoped to see Charles in the morning, perhaps share breakfast with him like a small, makeshift family, but recognizing the futility of arguing with Mary, she forced herself to get up and prepare for the day. Lazily but obediently, Barbara got out of bed, still thinking about Charles and the kindness he had shown. She brushed her teeth and dressed alone, a bit awkward, still unaccustomed to the luxury and formality of the mansion. The housekeeper waited impatiently to take the girl to breakfast, a daily ritual Barbara had never experienced before. Seated at the breakfast table, Barbara marveled at the quantity and variety of foods, so different from her routine of scarcity. However, the presence of Mary made the meal less enjoyable. The housekeeper, maintaining her cold tone of voice, instructed Barbara, do not dare leave the room under any circumstances. I don't have time to watch children, she said, making it clear that any disobedience would be unacceptable. Barbara nodded, pretending to agree with Mary's instructions. However, in her heart, the girl was already planning to explore the mansion as soon as she got the chance. The curiosity and desire for adventure were too strong to be contained by stern orders. She imagined the secrets the grand house might hide, the corners and nooks still unknown to her. Mary took the girl back to her room after breakfast. At that moment, Barbara felt a mix of excitement and nervousness at the prospect of disobeying the rules. She knew she could get into trouble if caught, but the adventure called her name, and the possibility of discovering more about Charles's world was too tempting to resist. As soon as the door closed behind Mary, Barbara began planning her next move. With her heart beating a little faster, she pressed her ear against the bedroom door, attentive to the sounds of the waking house. The sound of Mary's footsteps moving away down the hallway encouraged her. She waited a few moments, ensuring the housekeeper was far enough away, and then, with a sigh of determination, silently opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Charles's mansion was like a labyrinth of wonders to Barbara. Each corridor, each open door revealed something new and exciting. She explored with wide eyes, curiosity guiding each step. At one moment, she stopped to open drawers filled with mysterious objects and relics of a distant past. At another, she peered inside huge vases that seemed capable of hiding secrets. The paintings on the walls told stories of past generations, with eyes that followed Barbara as she passed. The girl wondered about the people in the paintings, imagining their lives and adventures. Each room she explored seemed to whisper ancient stories, filling her mind with questions and wonders. It was during this exploration that Barbara found the slightly open door to Sandra's room. With a mix of curiosity and hesitation, she entered, finding the elderly lady sitting in an armchair, staring into nothingness. Hello, said Barbara kindly, approaching. Sandra turned her face toward the voice, but her eyes showed no recognition or understanding. Trying to start a conversation, Barbara continued, I'm Barbara. I'm a friend of Charles's. But Sandra remained silent, her mind lost in labyrinths of memories that could no longer be easily accessed. The girl sat beside her telling stories of the forest, her cardboard house, and how Charles had found her. Despite the lack of response, Barbara felt a strange connection, as if somehow her words offered comfort to the lady. However, restlessness soon took over Barbara again. The calm of the room was cozy, but her youthful curiosity did not allow her to stay still for long. Thus, she turned her attention to her surroundings, determined to discover what more the space held. The drawers and dressers reveal little beyond everyday objects and some dusty treasures, relics of a time that did not speak to her. None of this, however, quenched her thirst for adventure. It was then that her eyes landed on a massive wardrobe at the end of the room, a piece of furniture that seemed to hold secrets within its intricately carved wood. With hesitant hands, Barbara opened one of its doors, revealing an interior that was a treasure in itself. Inside, a guitar rested with the promise of forgotten melodies, but it was a very old notebook that completely captured her attention. Carefully, she took the notebook from its hiding place, feeling the weight of history in her hands. The tiny yellow pages seemed to whisper stories that awaited rediscovery. However, the moment of discovery was abruptly interrupted by Mary's voice in the hallway. Barbara's heart raced, and instinctively she hid the notebook under her clothes, fearing the housekeeper might take this new treasure from her. When Mary entered the room and saw her, the reprimand was immediate. "Barbara, what are you doing here? I told you to stay in your room," Mary exclaimed, irritation evident in her voice. The housekeeper's authority filled the space, making Barbara shrink back, guilt and fear evident in her look. "I was just looking," she murmured, knowing there was no excuse good enough to justify her disobedience. Sternly, Mary forced Barbara to return to her room, repeating that she was not to explore the house. "It's not safe, and you should not touch things that aren't yours," Mary warned as she escorted Barbara back to her room. The adventure had ended for now, but the notebook hidden under her clothes was a secret Barbara kept to herself, a piece of mystery she was determined to unravel. Back in the safety of her temporary room, Barbara sat on the bed, the old notebook now a treasure all her own, hidden from Mary's sight and scolding. With her heart still racing from the recent adventure and discovery, she carefully opened the notebook. The pages whispered promises of ancient secrets as she read. A world unfolded before her, a realm of memories preserved against the relentless advance of oblivion. It was evident that the notebook served as a place of records for Sandra, a desperate attempt to cling to memories that Alzheimer's disease had destroyed, a condition Sandra also mentioned in the diary in a sad and desperate manner. As Barbara leafed through the pages, she uncovered another fact about Sandra: her passion for music. Among the personal memories and reflections were song lyrics and melodies noted down, sketches of an artistic soul trying to express itself through art. Sandra was not just a mother and a woman battling a terrible disease. She was a composer whose emotions and thoughts found an outlet in music. Then Barbara found a dedication to her son, a song Sandra had composed especially for Charles. The lyrics of the song were simple but deeply moving. "In your eyes, I find my light, like a star that shines in the sky. Your smile is my peace. It's the luck that life brings me. You grow so much, my little one, but in my heart, I always keep you. And with love, I wrap you in my arms, and love you without fear of loving. My little bird, fly far away, fly high and far, go live. For even from afar, I keep you forever. And through these notes, I will reach you." After finishing reading the lyrics, Barbara closed the notebook, deeply moved by the discovery. The psalm was not just a mother's tribute to her son. It was a reminder of what Sandra once was, her love for her son and her passion for art. Yet all these characteristics that once were part of the lady were now simply forgotten. At that moment, Barbara knew she had found something truly special. She decided that somehow she needed to help, but chose to wait and think about what she could do to achieve this goal. With that resolution, night approached, and Charles returned from work. He, happy to reunite with the girl, suggested a walk through the forest, an attempt to reconnect with the peace they had found together the night before. For Barbara, this was the perfect opportunity to bring up the subject that now occupied all her thoughts. Walking side by side through the forest, Barbara gathered the courage to touch on the subject delicately. "Charles, Mrs. Sandra, she was a composer, wasn't she?" Her voice was soft, trying to seem casual, but her intertwined hands betrayed her anxiety for the response. Charles looked at Barbara, surprised by the question. For a moment, he pondered how she could know about that. "Yes, she was an incredible composer. She wrote really beautiful music. But how did you come to know about this?" he asked with a hint of curiosity in his voice. "Oh, I saw a guitar in her room when I got lost in the house. It was completely accidental, I swear by my breakfast." Barbara stammered over her words, the lie coming out more complicated than she expected. "I like music," she added quickly, hoping to divert any suspicion. Charles smiled, the tension in his shoulders relaxing. She loved to play. Composing was her way of expressing love, joy, sadness, everything. She even composed a song for me when I was little. It went something like this. The memory seemed to bring back a simpler time, a time of warmth and unconditional love. Charles began to hum the melody his mother had composed especially for him. The music was soft, a song that spoke of eternal and unconditional love, of hope and protection. Charles's voice, though hesitant at first, gained strength, filled with emotion and nostalgia. Barbara listened in silence, the beauty of the music warming her heart. Through the melody, she felt as if she was touching a piece of Sanders' soul, now shared with her. With this emotion, she felt driven to reveal a bit more about herself. I could play the guitar too, you know. I've always really liked music as well, she said, a glint of pride in her eyes. The pleasant surprise made Charles look at her with newfound admiration. Really? And how did you learn? You're so young to know an instrument. You must be very smart to learn so quickly. Barbara smiled, a bit sad and proud at the same time. My dad taught me. He taught me many things. To read, to play, to be strong. She began, her voice carrying a mix of gratitude and melancholy. Charles noticed the depth of the connection Barbara had with the memories of her father, a relationship marked by love and loss. Intrigued and moved by her story, Charles asked, "And your mother? Did she also teach you many things?" Barbara looked down, collecting her memories before answering. My dad said she traveled to heaven after I was born. The angels needed her there. I don't know why, but she never came back, she explained simply, repeating the comforting words her father had told her. After my dad got sick with a heart condition, he also had to go. He left me alone. The neighbors took care of me for a while after he left, but I knew I had to fend for myself. I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. Barbara's words deeply touched Charles, revealing a life marked by challenges that no child should face. Yet her strength shone through her story, a light of hope and resilience that defied the shadows of the past. Barbara, your courage is admirable. I'm so sorry for everything you've gone through, but now you're here, and you're not alone anymore, Charles said, offering not just his support, but also the comfort of a new family. The conversation between them, though filled with emotions and painful revelations, created an even stronger bond. Barbara, for the first time in a long while, felt welcomed and safe, knowing that with Charles she could find a new beginning. Charles, impacted by Barbara's strength and life story, found a new determination to offer her a better future. A silent promise of protection and care he vowed to fulfill. After a walk in the forest, which served both to relieve emotions and to strengthen the bond between them, Charles led Barbara back to the mansion. His spirit was heavy with reflections, but also lightened by the girl's presence. Carefully, he prepared Barbara for bed, ensuring she felt comfortable and secure in her new temporary reality. Watching her fall asleep, a sense of paternal protection grew within him, a desire to provide for her everything that life had denied her so far. As he left Barbara's room, his steps were firm, marked by a newly formed decision in his heart. Finding Mary in the hallway, Charles couldn't contain the urgency he felt in sharing his thoughts. "Mary, I've been thinking about something very serious. I want to officially adopt Barbara," he declared, his resolution clear in his voice. Mary, always pragmatic and somewhat skeptical, received the news with an expression that mixed surprise and disapproval. "Adopt the girl, Charles. Are you sure? That's a huge responsibility, and with everything you already have to manage, I don't know if you're up for it," she hesitated, concerned not just with the implications of the decision but also questioning Charles's capacity to take on such a commitment. Charles, however, was immune to Mary's doubts. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life," he responded, determination shining in his eyes. "Barbara has shown me what was missing in my life. I can give her a family, a home, and honestly, I think she has a lot to offer me too." Mary observed Charles, searching for any hesitation or doubt that might be reasonable, but what she saw instead was a man transformed by the presence of a child, someone willing to completely alter his life trajectory for her. "Charles, I just want you to think it through. Adoption isn't something you do on a whim. You need to be prepared for everything, for all the joys and challenges it brings." Charles nodded, understanding Mary's concerns, but his decision remained unchanged. "I know it will be a challenge, but I'm ready. I will do whatever it takes. Barbara deserves a chance for a better life, and I want to be part of that." The conviction in his words was extreme, and Mary recognized the genuineness of his intention. The next day, unexpectedly, the certainty of this decision would be strengthened due to a very peculiar event. The following morning, Barbara found herself encouraged by a renewed determination. During breakfast, while Mary served the meal with her usual silence, Barbara seized the opportunity to address the subject. Mary, do you think there's any way to make Mrs. Sandra remember things again? Barbara asked, her innocence blending with a stubborn hope. The question took Mary by surprise, making her pause. She sighed, the reality of the situation clarifying in her expression before responding. Dear Mrs. Sanders' illness is something that can't be cured. She has Alzheimer's, and it has been getting worse over time. It's not something we can reverse, Mary explained, trying to be direct and not feed false hopes to the girl. Barbara absorbed the explanation with an unusual seriousness for her age, but the determination in her eyes did not waver. But there must be something we can do to help, even if it's just a little, she insisted, unable to accept that there was no hope at all for the grandmother she never had. Mary watched Barbara, admiring the girl's willpower. Well, they say that music and old memories sometimes can reach parts of the mind that we think are lost, but it's not guaranteed, Mary said. Encouraged by Mary's words, Barbara began to formulate a plan. She remembered Sandra's music notebook and the song Charles had hummed the night before. Maybe, she thought, music was the key to unlocking Sandra's dormant memories. I'll try with music then. Who knows, it might help a little, Barbara concluded, a firm resolution in her decision driven by her new mission. Barbara managed, with her childlike determination, to convince Mary to allow her to spend the day with Sandra. Armed with a mix of hope and a plan in mind, she entered the room where Sandra spent most of her days, a silent sanctuary of faded memories. Initially, Barbara tried to establish a conversation with Sandra, talking about the day and little things she hoped might spark some kind of reaction in the woman. However, her initial attempts resulted in a one-sided conversation, with Sandra remaining in her usual position in her armchair, immobile, and her gaze lost in some distant point. Undiscouraged by the lack of response, Barbara proceeded with her plan, shifting the focus of the conversation to something she believed was close to Sandra's heart: music. Mrs. Sandra, I saw a notebook in your room. It was filled with songs you composed. Wasn't it? They're so beautiful. Barbara spoke, her voice full of admiration. Do you remember when you wrote them? She talked about the songs with enthusiasm, describing the lyrics she had read and the melodies that Charles had shared with her, hoping that the mention of her past passions could ignite a spark of recognition in Sandra's eyes. The song you made for Charles. I heard him sing it. It's so beautiful. It speaks of love and hope, continued Barbara, trying to reach Sandra's soul through her words. Despite her persistent attempts, Sandra's reaction remained unchanged, her expression distant, as if she were in a world apart, far from Barbara's reach. The girl, however, did not allow the lack of response to shake her. She understood that even without a visible change, these moments of sharing could be important. Determined, she decided she would try to find other ways, convinced that the music and the love it represented had the power to cross the barriers imposed by the disease. Then she had another idea. She went to her room to fetch Sandra's diary and returned to the lady's room with it in hand, believing that perhaps seeing her own lyrics and melodies, Sandra might find a way back to the memories the disease was stealing from her. Carefully, she opened the notebook. Look, Mrs. Sandra, said Barbara, holding the notebook in a way that Sandra could see the writings. These are your songs. Do you remember writing them? They are very beautiful. I really like them. Her voice full of hope, she began to recite the verses of the songs. But despite the emotion Barbara put into each verse, Sandra's reaction was the same as before. None. She remained still, her distant gaze seeming to look through the notebook, through the walls of the room to a place only she knew. The lack of response did not diminish Barbara's spirit. Instead, it fueled her determination to find something more, something that could touch Sandra's heart in a way that words alone could not. With that thought, Barbara headed again to the large wardrobe in Sandra's room, exploring its interior once more. Her eyes lit up upon discovering a box full of musical score notebooks right next to the guitar. It was a hidden treasure, the keys to the melodies that accompanied the lyrics she had read. Barbara picked up one of the notebooks, flipping through the pages filled with musical notes. Each page was a promise of sound, a potential bridge to Sandra's dormant consciousness. This might work, thought Barbara, a plan forming in her mind. If words couldn't reach Sandra, perhaps the music itself, in its purest form, could. Excited by the possibility, Barbara decided it was time to put her plan into action. With the notebooks in hand, she began to compare the titles of the songs and the scores with those in Sandra's diary. When she finally found matches, a mix of anxiety and excitement took over her. With Sandra's guitar, she tried to play and sing the songs, hoping that the combination of melody and lyrics could awaken some memory in Sandra's mind. Despite her efforts and the melody flowing from her fingers with increasing confidence, Sandra's reaction remained the same. None. Barbara realized that maybe the lack of familiarity with the exact way to sing Sandra's psalms was preventing the connection she so desperately sought. But the girl did not let herself be discouraged. She persisted, trying different songs, adjusting her voice to the melody of the guitar as best as she could. The day turned into afternoon, where she had to stop for lunch and then return. Eventually, it became evening. As Barbara continued her singing next to Sandra, her fingers began to hurt and her throat to dry, but her spirit refused to give in to discouragement. Each chord played was a silent plea for Sandra to return, even if just for a moment, to the land that music had created. As night fell, Barbara finally had to pause, her fingers sore and her heart heavy with frustration. Despite her tireless attempts, she had not achieved the reaction she so desired from Sandra. Barbara sat silently on the floor, letting the guitar rest. Exhaustion and disillusionment began to set in, but amidst the quiet, a flash of inspiration struck her, the melody that Charles had shared with her in the forest. The song his mother had composed especially for him resurfaced in her mind as a beacon of hope. It was the one song where she knew the exact rhythm of the singing. With renewed determination, Barbara sifted through the scores, eagerly searching for the music. Finally, among the sheets of paper yellowed by time, she found the precious score. The notes of the music dedicated to Charles danced before her eyes. She took a deep breath, feeling a mix of nervousness and hope, and positioned her fingers on the guitar. Carefully, she began to play the first notes. The melody flowed more easily this time, each chord echoing in the room with an emotional depth she'd hoped would reach Sandra's heart. Then, with a clear voice, she began to sing the verses she had memorized. It was at that moment, as the music filled the entire room, that a different sparkle appeared in Sandra's eyes. For an instant, the fog that seemed to envelop her mind dissipated, and she slowly turned her head toward Barbara as if waking from a long dream. Sandra's eyes fixed on the girl, a fleeting recognition crossing her gaze. While this scene unfolded, after an exhausting day of work, Charles was returning home with his thoughts turned to Barbara and the small joys her presence brought to the mansion. Upon arrival, his first instinct was to look for the girl. Her absence from her room sparked a pang of concern, and he hurried in search of answers. He went to Mary with anxiety marked on his expression, seeking information about the girl. "Mary, have you seen Barbara? She's not in her room," he asked. Mary, who was tidying some objects, turned to him with a calm expression. "She's in Mrs. Sanders' room. She spent the entire day there trying to help the lady recover," she replied, a glint of approval in her eyes. "Recover? What do you mean?" Curiosity and concern mingled in Charles's question. The idea of Barbara alone with Sandra all day left him both worried and curious. Mary sighed, choosing her words carefully. "She spent the whole day playing the guitar and singing songs to her. She probably saw the diary and the scores of your mother and decided to sing. It's a beautiful thing to see. Come, I'll show you." The housekeeper indicated the way, leading him down the hallway toward Sandra's room. As they walked, Charles felt a mix of anxiety and hope. The possibility that Barbara had found a way to reach his mother, who had been closed off in her own world for years, seemed close to a miracle. "Mary, did it really work? Did my mother react in any way?" he asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Mary gave him a serious look. "Not that I know of. The last time I checked on the two, Mrs. Sandra remained the same as always. But what matters is the girl's intention." A slight discouragement from the lack of expectation made Charles sigh. But before they even reached the door, a soft melody and two voices in harmony reached his ears. Charles stopped immediately, recognizing his mother's voice in a song he never expected to hear again. His heart raced, pulsing with a mix of surprise, hope, and a deep emotion he couldn't name. Driven by strong hope, Charles rushed down the rest of the hallway, guided by the sound that seemed to call for him. Upon reaching the room's door, he found a scene he never thought possible. His mother, Sandra, was singing along with Barbara, united by the music he had shared in the forest. The music his mother composed for him in the distant past was now the link between generations, between memory and the present. Tears began to freely run down Charles's face, each drop carrying years of longing, love, and the pain of loss. Seeing his mother like this, awake and participating in the world once more, even if for a brief moment, brought immense relief and indescribable joy. Barbara's presence, the key that had unlocked this door to the past, reinforced in his heart the decision to make her part of his family. He remained at the door, watching the scene, the music filling his heart. When the last notes of the song echoed through the room, the silence that followed carried a wave of emotions. Sandra, with a glint of lucidity not seen in her eyes for a long time, turned towards Charles. The smile she offered him was a rare gift of recognition and affection. "Charles, my dear, stop crying. You look as if you've been pinched," she said, her voice fragile but incredibly clear. Sandra's words, as unexpected as they were precious, only intensified Charles's crying. He smiled through the tears, a smile that carried years of repressed pain, love, and longing. Unable to contain the emotion overflowing within him, he ran to hug his mother, enveloping her in an embrace that symbolized both loss and reunion. Barbara, though not fully understanding the depth of the suffering and joy Charles was experiencing, found herself moved by the tears he shed. The young girl who had spent so much time seeking her own connection with a lost past and family cried alongside them, touched by the intensity of the shared moment. Mary, in turn, tried to disguise her own tears, but the emotion of the reunion shook her heart as much as it did the others. That brief moment of clarity was an unexpected gift for Charles, a glimmer of hope amidst his mother's illness. However, like all precious things, Sandra's lucidity was not everlasting. Charles watched with a mix of gratitude and sadness as the light in her eyes slowly dissipated and she returned to the silence and distance that had marked her existence in recent years. Before leaving her, he tenderly kissed his mother's forehead, a gesture of farewell to that moment of connection, laden with happiness for what had happened and sadness for the brevity of that clarity. Turning to Barbara, who watched everything with pride for what she had managed to do, Charles extended his hand and said, with a voice choked with emotion, "Let's go for a walk in the forest, Barbara. We need some fresh air." The girl, wiping her own tears, nodded. Walking side by side under the canopy of trees, the silence between them was filled with the sound of their footsteps on the earth. It was a comfortable silence, a space to process the tumultuous emotions that the day had brought. Yet, driven by his gratitude, Charles broke the silence. His voice was still laden with emotion. "You did something amazing today, Barbara. I don't know how to thank you for giving me that moment with my mother." Barbara, holding Charles's hand tightly, smiled shyly. "I just wanted to help," she said simply. "But I was happy to. Seeing you two like that was beautiful. I'm glad I could do it. You look so happy." Charles looked at Barbara with a smile that radiated his happiness. The strength of the moment shared with his mother was still very alive in his heart, reinforcing a decision he had made, one that would change their lives forever. "Barbara," he began, drawing the girl's attention with the tender seriousness in his voice, "I've been thinking a lot about us and how you came into my life in such an unexpected way. And all of this has given me an idea that I wanted to see if you like." Barbara, curious and a bit anxious, looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "What idea is that, Charles?" she asked, her expression reflecting a mix of excitement and slight concern. Charles stopped, turning to face her directly, wanting her to see the sincerity and love in his eyes. "Barbara, how would you feel if I adopted you? If you officially became my daughter?" Barbara's reaction was immediate and intense. Her eyes widened with surprise and then quickly filled with a sparkle of pure joy. "Really? You want to be my new daddy?" She could barely contain her excitement, a broad smile spreading across her face. "Yes, seriously," Charles replied, his own smile mirroring hers. "Barbara, you're already a part of my family and my heart, but I want it to be official for the whole world to know." With a cry of joy, Barbara leaped into Charles, hugging him with all the strength she had. "I would love that," she said. "Charles, being a princess and living in the castle, it's going to be amazing to have a daddy again." Her voice, though altered by emotion, was filled with happiness and anticipation for the future that was now unfolding before her. As they continued their walk through the forest, now with a new bond forming between them, both felt a lightness and hope they hadn't known in a long time. For Charles, the decision to adopt Barbara was a step towards a future full of possibilities and love. For Barbara, it was the promise of a home and a family, something she had longed for since she lost her own. United by music, fate, and now a promise of adoption, they returned to the mansion ready to start a new chapter of their lives together. In a world where hope often seems fragile, ready to be extinguished by hardships, the story of Barbara and Charles serves as a reminder of the transformative power of love, determination, and compassion. In the weeks following that unforgettable day when the promise of a new family was made, Charles did everything in his power to make Barbara's adoption official. The speed with which everything happened was a testament not only to his determination but also to how right this decision was for both of them. Barbara, now officially part of the family, began to live under the love and care of Charles. Mary herself unexpectedly found a new role. She shared the girls' pursuit of learning and discovery. Her laughter filled the halls of the mansion that once seemed so empty and dead. Her love of learning and her keen intellect was a continual source of pride for Charles. Now it was Barbara's music moments with Sandra, short but sweet, which brought solace and delight to all in the mansion. Briefly, but still in Sandra terms, very much healing the scratches left behind by progression of her disease. They were, Charles believed, a hint that Alzheimer's may separate but never extinguish the right love. So, those days at the mansion were never to be back. Days of discovery, days with tunes carefully chosen for the occasion, giggles shared aloud and hearts quietly grateful. Charles and Barbara, with Mary standing somewhere in the middle, to sometimes be assisted by a lucid Sandra whenever she could join their family meetings. A family bonded not only through blood but with each other's heart. Their story is a great example of how, despite what surprises life might throw our way, family can be discovered and created. Photo by Georgie Chalikal on the splash. Barbara and Charles both, infusing their lives with new beginnings. And they demonstrated, in spite of it all, you can still find joy and connection. Each day in that mansion, now overrun with love and laughter, was a reminder, brought on by the power of love and the beauty of family. If you like this story, smash that like button and join our community by subscribing to the channel. It helps fuel us to deliver interesting stories almost every day. Check out the biggest news story in high tech right now, which you probably missed from scrolling your newsfeed. Thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts. See you soon.